December 8th, 1980. The dream is over. John Lennon is dead. John Lennon, the idol of millions, devoted husband of Yoko Ono, and father to Sean Ono Lennon, was brutally gunned down in front of the Dakota, his New York apartment house. The suspect in custody, a 25-year-old man from Hawaii who seemed to pattern his life after Lennon's and admitted to the vicious killing without hesitation or remorse. Mark Chapman spent hours outside the Dakota apartment building waiting for Lennon, and according to the security guard and New York City police, fired at the man whose music moved millions as he walked from his limousine to the entryway of the Dakota.
Mr. Chapman came up behind him and called to him, Mr. Lennon, as he arrived at that doorway. And then in a combat stance, he emptied the Charter Arms .38 caliber gun that he had with him and shot John Lennon.
New York City Chief of Detectives James Sullivan says Chapman dropped his gun after the shooting, waiting to be apprehended, as John Lennon was fatally wounded.
I was passing with Dakota, and I saw John and Yoko come out of the limousine.
A woman identified only as Nina was outside the Dakota at the time of the shooting.
They walked out of the limousine, they walked up the path, into the gate, and halfway up, just about when I was approaching the corner, I heard shots, loud shots. They were ear deafening. And I stood there for a minute, and then I walked across the street. There were two joggers there. They stopped also. They asked me, did you hear those shots? And I said, yes. And I said, I don't know what happened. And they said that John and Yoko went into the building.
Lennon was rushed to nearby Roosevelt Hospital with Yoko Ono at his side. She was shocked. She couldn't believe it, and she begged police to tell her it wasn't true, that it hadn't happened. But by the time Lennon arrived at the Roosevelt emergency room, the world Yoko Ono knew came crashing down with a sudden and violent finality as the official statement was made.
John Lennon was brought to the emergency room shortly before 11 p.m. He was dead on arrival.
We got a fresh lesson in avoiding assumptions last night. It seemed reasonable to assume that when John Lennon died, it would not be violent. But the man who once asked the world to give peace a chance was gunned down on a New York sidewalk last night. John Lennon is dead. Lennon, along with Paul McCartney, wrote most of the songs that made the Beatles the biggest selling group in the history of the recording business. So many millions of people from every corner of the earth grew up with them. People like Vincent Peasy of Manhattan.
When I was very, very young, my mom grabbed me and said, come in and look at this, and that was before them on television. So ever since then, and that's the first rock and roll I really remember. I guess, I don't know, I might have been like 8, if that.
So, you look upset.
I am upset.
Mark David Chapman was about 8 years old when John Lennon first appeared on American TV. Today, he is 25 and facing arraignment for John Lennon's murder. Police in New York say hours before he allegedly shot Lennon, Chapman had persuaded the former Beatle to autograph one of his albums. A London newspaper, the New Standard, runs an editorial today full of anger over America's gun laws. The paper says John Lennon's meaningless murder is increasingly typical of New York City and of the United States in general, where the freedom, it says, to carry guns has brought forth monsters. And the editorial adds that Lennon's reputation and achievement will remain secure in the memory of all of those to whom the music of the Beatles came as a delight and revelation. Britain's Press Association says Lennon helped shape an entire generation of young people. Tom Martin, Washington. It hit hard when it reached former Beatles McCartney, Starr, and Harrison. Frank Sesno says Paul McCartney is all but speechless.
Paul McCartney, deeply shocked by the news of John Lennon's death, left his Sussex farmhouse in southern England, saying, I can't take it in at the moment. Visibly shaken, McCartney told waiting reporters, John was a great guy. He's going to be missed by the whole world. McCartney was looking pale and depressed as he and his wife Linda drove away from their home. McCartney had scheduled a recording session in London, but his plans are now said to be uncertain because of Lennon's death. He and Lennon formed one of the greatest writing teams in contemporary music. Spokesman at McCartney Productions Limited said Paul and John had been in contact regularly, though they hadn't seen one another in several years. The Beatles broke up in 1970. Frank Sesno, London.
In Tokyo today, Kazuki Ono, Yoko Ono's younger brother, told the AP he's heading for the States to try to talk his sister into going back to Japan, where, as he put it, she doesn't have to worry about gunshots anymore. Ono called his brother-in-law a really good man, a good father, good husband, and good friend. The news brought hundreds into the streets outside the Lennon's apartment building in Manhattan early this morning, including correspondent Warren Levinson.
Hundreds of people stood on the surrounding street and sidewalks for hours, speaking only in hushed tones. Many wept. Some tried to sing old Beatle tunes, but it was without spirit. Candles burned in two of the building's second-story windows and music.
Well, my friend said it better than I did. She said that the Beatles' music was like the beginning of our adolescence, and this is the end.
They were there to mark the death of John Lennon, but many felt a part of themselves had died as well. Warren Levinson, New York.
John Lennon is dead at 40. This is the AP Radio Network.
But I'm not the only one.
Arraigned in a New York City court.
The baby-faced Chapman showed no emotion, did not react when the charges against him were read. Assistant District Attorney Jim Hogriff called Chapman cool, calm, and rational since his arrest late last night. And the DA said Chapman carried out what he called a deliberate, premeditated execution of Lennon. Hogriff also said that Chapman was unemployed, but was able to borrow a large amount of money in Hawaii to, quote, come to New York City to do what he has done, unquote. $2,000 was found on Chapman, said the DA, who added the defendant has a dozen outstanding arrest warrants in other states, including burglary, armed robbery, and abduction. Chapman's court-appointed attorney revealed that Chapman has twice tried to commit suicide. He called the killing of Lennon a motiveless crime. The judge ordered Chapman to undergo psychiatric tests before his next court appearance on January 6th. Chris Kelly, CBS News, New York.
President-elect Ronald Reagan has called last night's slaying of the former Beatle a great tragedy, but he adds that the murder has not changed his position against gun control. Reagan says he still believes in the kind of handgun legislation that was in effect while he was governor of California. The president-elect explained that meant if somebody commits a crime and carries a gun when he's doing it, you add 5 to 15 years to his prison sentence. President Carter has expressed his sorrow over the murder of John Lennon.
Praising Lennon as a man whose spirit became the spirit of a whole generation, President Carter said he was saddened by the singer's death and by the senseless manner of it. Mr. Carter said it's especially poignant that John Lennon has died by violence, though he had long campaigned for peace. Extending the sympathies of himself and Mrs. Carter to Lennon's wife and son, the president noted that John Lennon had chosen to live in America because of the atmosphere of freedom and ferment he found here. Mr. Carter said the singer leaves an extraordinary and permanent legacy. Jim Slade, Mutual News, the White House.
Beatle albums and Lennon records are quickly disappearing from the shelves of U.S. record stores. AP Radio reports from San Francisco.
San Francisco, where the Beatles made their final appearance together in concert more than 14 years ago, fans of John Lennon jammed record stores, many of them weeping. The regional manager of the city's largest record outlet, Stan Goman, says the impact here of Lennon's death has been profound.
I've never seen so many sad people in my life. I mean, it's very similar to when John F. Kennedy got shot, and I was eating lunch in my high school cafeteria, and the whole place went bananas. It's real similar. The people, it's kind of like a wake. They're coming in, they're buying the records, they're going home, they're replenishing their Beatle collections.
One woman carried at least a dozen Beatle albums as she wandered around the store, whose billboard outside displayed a Lennon song title, Give Peace a Chance. Rob Navius, San Francisco.
This past weekend, John Lennon could be heard over the BBC telling a disc jockey that he liked living in New York City because he felt so secure.
Mr. John Lennon, the ex-Beatle, was shot at 1 West 72nd Street. He was removed to Roosevelt Hospital where he expired.
And today, a 25-year-old man from Hawaii is under arrest for John Lennon's murder. Sam Hall reports.
Mark David Chapman is 25, lived in Hawaii, came to New York a week or two ago. Police say they do not know whether he was intent on killing Lennon, although he was seen hanging out for several days near Lennon's apartment and even got Lennon to autograph an album only hours before the shooting. Chapman has no apparent police record. He worked at a hospital in Hawaii until a year ago, then quit. Said he wanted to become a security guard. Whether he did or not known. Police say the murder weapon was purchased in Hawaii. It is not known if Chapman had a permit for it. As for a motive, nothing firm yet, but one police source said Chapman indicated he was annoyed that Lennon had only scribbled his autograph. Sam Hall in New York.
In that BBC interview, Lennon mentioned his freedom to take strolls around his Manhattan neighborhood. Outside Lennon's apartment building this morning, New Yorker Mike Dominguez remembers that too.
I just got his album, he used to live in my neighborhood on Broadway, like in the 70s or something, and I saw him walking on Broadway one time with Yoko, and I said, hey, how you doing? I said, I want to join your group, kid around. He put a big smile on his face, you know.
Ex-Beatles McCartney, Starr, and Harrison are described today as deeply shocked. Tom Martin, Washington. That new album by John Lennon and Yoko Ono was to be an expression of a fresh start. In fact, the title cut is Starting Over. Just yesterday, John Lennon was sitting in front of an RKO radio microphone talking about his new life with Yoko Ono and their son Sean, his new album and its intended audience, those of us who grew up with the Beatles, and his hope for tomorrow.
You have to give thanks to God or whatever it is up there, the fact that we all survived. We all survived Vietnam or Watergate or the tremendous upheaval of the whole world that's changed. We were the hip ones in the 60s, but the world is not like the 60s anymore. The whole map's changed, and we're going into an unknown future, but we're still all here. While there's life, there's hope.
John Lennon speaking less than 24 hours ago in New York. Today, Yoko Ono's younger brother says in Tokyo that he's heading for the States to try and persuade his sister to return to Japan. In London today, record shops reports say they are swamped by people trying to buy Lennon's new album, which before last night was not a big seller. And many of those whose lives at one time or another were directly linked with the Beatles remember how it was. There's more on that from correspondent Frank Sesno in London.
Record producer George Martin, who helped rocket the Beatles to stardom and was often called the fifth Beatle, said he was stunned beyond belief at the news of John Lennon's death. Martin, who was involved with the trend-setting group from 1962 to 1970, acknowledged that Lennon had become a bit of a recluse in the past few years. But Martin said he treasured the relationship they had shared.
I haven't seen John for about 18 months, I suppose, but I was always very, very fond of him. We worked very closely together in the early days.
News of Lennon's death came too early for British morning newspapers, but radio stations are broadcasting details of the shooting from New York and are playing music from Beatles albums and Lennon's latest soundtrack, Double Fantasy. Frank Sesno, London.
Together with Paul McCartney, John Lennon has been compared with the likes of Beethoven and Bach. This is the AP Radio Network.
As a tremendous shock. Martin, who was associated with the Beatles from 1962 to 1970, was often called the fifth Beatle. He says he had not seen Lennon for about 18 months, but that he was always very fond of John Lennon and kept in touch with him.
Lennon was brought to Roosevelt Hospital's emergency room shortly before 11 p.m., according to Dr. Stephen Lynn, Director of Emergency Room Services.
He was dead on arrival. Extensive resuscitative efforts were made, but in spite of transfusions and many procedures, he could not be resuscitated.
Where was he shot, Doc, and how many times?
He had multiple gunshot wounds in his chest, in his left arm, and in his back.
Lynn said there were 7 wounds in Lennon's body, although he could not say how many shots were actually fired. Lennon died, said Lynn, from damage to the large blood vessels in his chest. He probably died, Lynn said, almost instantly. Lennon's wife, Yoko Ono, was with the singer when he was shot and later at the hospital. According to Lennon's record producer, Jack Douglas, Lennon had been at a recording session, had taken a break to go home to get something to eat. He was shot in the entrance to his apartment. Stephanie Shelton, CBS News, New York.
New York City police say the man who shot and killed former Beatle John Lennon apparently had been stalking the rock star for several days. Police describe the gunman, who's in custody, as apparently a wacko.
Ironically, John Lennon spoke about death in an interview published in the current issue of Playboy magazine. It was not a subject with which he appeared fascinated. He told Playboy he had no desire to follow in the footsteps of entertainment stars who died before their careers had ended and were worshipped for it. Said Lennon, it's better to fade away than to burn out. Lennon said he worshipped the people who survive. And he added, death? No thank you. I'll take the living and the healthy. This is Bob Moon in Washington.
Good afternoon from the AP and UPI, national and international developments. New York police have identified the suspect in last night's shooting death of former Beatle John Lennon as 25-year-old Mark David Chapman, a native of Hawaii. Police say Chapman had been in New York for 2 weeks and apparently had been stalking Lennon for several days. The chief of detectives describes the suspect as a wacko. Lennon was shot as he returned to his luxury Manhattan apartment building after a late-night recording session. Witnesses say the gunman walked up to the singer, said Mr. Lennon, and then began shooting.
There are still several hundred people outside the Dakota, the exclusive New York landmark apartment building where John Lennon lived and a few hours ago died. A short while ago, Chief of Detectives James T. Sullivan told reporters what little he knows about the shooting. At about 10:50 p.m. Eastern Time, Lennon and his wife, Yoko Ono, returned from a recording studio in a limousine. Lennon got out and went into a vestibule in the apartment building when a gunman fired 5 shots from a .38 caliber revolver. The former Beatle hit several times, walked up 5 steps into an office area, and then collapsed. A police car was dispatched to the scene and rushed Lennon to Roosevelt Hospital in New York, where he was pronounced dead on arrival. New York police say they have arrested a man they think is the gunman, a white male. There are reports, unconfirmed at this time, that the gunman had been hanging around the Dakota apartment building for several days, perhaps waiting for Lennon. The possible motive for the shooting is still unknown. There's a crowd of several hundred people milling about outside the apartment building. Some of his fans are weeping, and at least one has fainted. In the background, mixed in with the police walkie-talkies, you can hear radio stations in New York playing John Lennon's music. Steve Croft, CBS News, New York.
The world mourns John Lennon, and the United States sees no immediate invasion of Poland.
News World, AFN's total information service.
Good evening from the AP and UPI, national and international developments. Specialist Wanda Chavers reporting. John Lennon is dead at the age of 40, and fans are trying to put their grief into words.
It's eerie to me, and it's scary, and it's frightening, and it's sad. Terribly sad. It's like losing a distant relative to everybody, you know. It's just been around to us for, so many years.
We're talking about a living legend, and I guess it's just, I feel like what right does anybody have to take anybody's life, but it's just, I guess, it's part of a legend of 4 people, and now one's gone.
The composer, singer, and ex-Beatle met death late last night outside the Dakota apartment building where he lived on Manhattan's West Side. A man stood there waiting for him, and he called out Lennon's name and opened fire. Lennon staggered up a short flight of steps, cried out, "I'm shot," and then collapsed. Police rushed the singer to Roosevelt Hospital, about a mile away, and Randy Daniels reports what happened there.
A spokesman for Roosevelt Hospital said death came quickly for John Lennon. The former Beatle sustained 7 wounds that ruptured major blood vessels and caused massive bleeding. Hospital officials said Lennon was dead on arrival and that efforts to resuscitate him failed. His accused assailant, Mark David Chapman, a 25-year-old Hawaii resident, had been seen loitering around Lennon's apartment building for several days. Chapman even secured an autograph from his victim, only hours before police said he emptied a .38 caliber revolver into the singer's body. Lennon's wife, Yoko, who was with him at the time of the shooting, was reportedly distraught and unable to accept her husband's death. Hundreds of Beatle fans converged on Lennon's residence throughout the night to share her grief. They cried, they prayed, and sang the songs that had helped shape the lives of a generation of Americans. Randy Daniels, CBS News, New York.
Peter Donnelly has more on the man who allegedly shot Lennon.
Police refuse to say where the man who allegedly shot John Lennon is being held. They say they don't want another Lee Harvey Oswald on their hands. Oswald, accused of killing President Kennedy, was shot and killed while in police custody by Jack Ruby, as millions watched on television. An eyewitness to the killing says the suspect in the Lennon murder, Mark David Chapman, had a smirk on his face when he pulled the trigger. Chief of Detectives in New York City, James Sullivan, said Chapman was apparently a wacko. The suspect is 25 years old and up until a week ago lived with his wife in Honolulu. Last year, John Lennon and his wife donated $1,000 to help buy bulletproof vests for city police. Peter Donnelly in New York.
Bruce Morrow, sometimes known as the 5th Beatle, remembers Lennon's influence on the world.
John Lennon, even though he retired for that 5 or 5.5 years, never really left the music scene. He might have left as far as actual performing, but his force, the magic of John Lennon, never left the music. I missed new records by John Lennon. I missed his creative energies. But as far as I'm concerned, as a musicologist, John Lennon's feelings and John Lennon's talent never left. His new album will remain, I guess, his epitaph. Even though it involved a lot of his new intellectual abilities and his creative abilities, and I think his rest more than anything else, same. It showed me that John Lennon never gave up the people.
And Frank says no reports on the reaction to Lennon's death by London fans and the press.
Here in Britain, where handguns are illegal and even police go without firearms, there's a certain feeling that John Lennon's death somehow typifies the violent American experience. In its editorial column, London's News Standard says Lennon's meaningless murder is increasingly typical of New York and the United States in general, where the freedom to carry guns has brought forth monsters. Reaction among the public discloses similar sentiments. Steve Bond celebrated his youth to the tunes of Beatles hits and has remained a Lennon fan.
It's a shock, but in today's world, and particularly in New York, one wonders if one is...
The musician has been arraigned on charges of killing former Beatle John Lennon. Chapman has been ordered to undergo 30 days of psychiatric examination at New York's Bellevue Hospital. Police say Chapman was arraigned on charges of second-degree murder, the highest possible under New York law when a law officer is not involved, and police say that as yet they have no motive. Lennon's widow, Yoko Ono, said there will be no funeral service for the former Beatle. She said Lennon's friends and fans would be invited later this week to pray for his soul, but her statement gave no dates or details.
We were there to mark the death of John Lennon, but many felt a part of themselves had died as well. Warren Levinson, New York.
John Lennon is dead at 40. We got a fresh lesson in avoiding assumptions last night. It seemed reasonable to assume that when John Lennon died, it would not be violent. But the man who once asked the world to give peace a chance was gunned down on a New York sidewalk last night. John Lennon is dead. Lennon, along with Paul McCartney, wrote most of the songs that made the Beatles the biggest-selling group in the history of the recording business. So many millions of people from every corner of the earth grew up with them. This past weekend, John Lennon could be heard over the BBC telling a disc jockey that he liked living in New York City because he felt so secure.
John Lennon, the ex-Beatle, was shot at 1 West 72nd Street. He was removed to Roosevelt Hospital where he expired.
And today, a 25-year-old man from Hawaii is under arrest for John Lennon's murders.
He was dead on arrival. Extensive resuscitative efforts were made, but in spite of transfusions and many procedures, he could not be resuscitated.
Where was he shot, Doc, and how many times?
He had multiple gunshot wounds in his chest, in his left arm, and in his back.
Lynn said there were 7 wounds in Lennon's body, although he could not say how many shots were actually fired. Lennon died, said Lynn, from damage to the large blood vessels in his chest. He probably died, Lynn said, almost instantly. Lennon's wife, Yoko Ono, was with the singer when he was shot and later at the hospital. According to Lennon's record producer, Jack Douglas, Lennon had been at a recording session, had taken a break to go home to get something to eat. He was shot in the entrance to his apartment. Stephanie Shelton, CBS News, New York.
New York City police say the man who shot and killed former Beatle John Lennon apparently have been stalking the rock star for several days. Police describe the gunman, who's in custody, as apparently a wacko.
Ironically, John Lennon spoke about death in an interview published in the current issue of Playboy magazine. It was not a subject with which he appeared fascinated. He told Playboy he had no desire to follow in the footsteps of entertainment stars who died before their careers had ended and were worshipped for it. Said Lennon, it's better to fade away than to burn out. Lennon said he worshipped the people who survive. And he added, death? No thank you. I'll take the living and the healthy.
Site of a murder which happened in New York City. AP Radio's Pam Roderick is there, where John Lennon was gunned down.
This morning's crowd of a few hundred has grown to a few thousand, standing packed behind police barricades in front of and across the street from the apartment house where John Lennon lived and died. Men, women, old, young, just stand, watching and listening as portable radios play old Beatles songs in a day-long tribute. Ask why they're here, and they say, just to be here, to pay their respect to a great musician, to share their sorrow and anger. The building's huge front gate is almost obscured by wreaths and hundreds of flowers hanging from its iron grillwork. And at the very top, a sign written in red on cardboard quotes an old Beatles hit, Strawberry Fields, Forever.
As one of the most outspoken and controversial rock stars in history, John Lennon once called the Beatles more famous than Jesus Christ. There may be a few who would dispute that statement, not an unusual one for the sometimes arrogant Briton who helped found the long-haired group that revolutionized rock music and had a heavy influence on the anti-war 60s. The songwriting team of John Lennon and fellow Beatle Paul McCartney wrote more hit songs than any modern composers. Lennon was born October 9, 1940, in Liverpool, England, the son of a porter father who deserted the family when the boy was only 3 years old. Lennon, later in life, refused to see his father after gaining stardom. Lennon attended secondary school in the northern industrial seaport of Liverpool, and then went on to Liverpool College of Art, where he married classmate Cynthia Powell. At the age of 16, John Lennon was on his way to getting together with the three musicians whose names also became household words: Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. In the near decade of their collaboration, the group sold more than 250 million records and made 3 movies: A Hard Day's Night, Help, and Let It Be. But it was their music, beginning with the release of Please Please Me in 1963, that made the group and influenced an entire generation. The Beatles' first tour of the United States and Canada came in 1964, including 2 historic appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show. October 26, 1965, they were presented Member of the British Empire medals from Queen Elizabeth. The Beatles broke up bitterly in 1970 when McCartney announced he was leaving the group because of personal, business, and musical differences, and talk of a reunion had been flourishing ever since. Many fans blamed the breakup on Yoko Ono, Lennon's Japanese-born second wife, with whom he collaborated throughout the 1970s. In 1975, the Lennons withdrew from public view, but then emerged recently to cut a new album, Double Fantasy. Lennon was an outspoken anti-war activist and charged that deportation proceedings against him in the 1970s were the result of his stand on the Vietnam War. He beat those proceedings in 1975, the same year a baby was born to him and Yoko. In recent years, John Lennon lived the life of what he called a house husband, breaking bread and looking after the baby. A larger-than-life-size metal sculpture of a virgin-like figure, high on the wall of an old warehouse in Matthew Street, Liverpool, is the shrine to the Beatles in the city which gave them birth. The figure, erected by fans, clasps 3 cherubs, and surrounding her are the initials J, P, G, and R. A plaque above the figure reads Beatles Street, and another below says, 4 lads who shook the world. On the opposite side of the street was the dank vault called The Cavern, where the Mersey sound was born and the Beatles first made music. The cavern is long gone now, making way for an excavation shaft for a subway link. Lennon was a student at Quarry Bank High School when he formed a group called the Quarrymen in 1955. Paul McCartney joined the following year, and George Harrison, still a schoolboy, joined in 1958. Ringo Starr was added late in 1962. In 1959, the group changed their name to Johnny and the Moondogs. During 1960, it was Lennon's idea to change again, and they became the Silver Beatles when they journeyed to Hamburg, West Germany. In summer 1960, they became simply Beatles, and the Germans loved them. At their first concert in Britain as the Beatles on December 27, 1960, in Liverpool, they were billed as direct from Hamburg, and the audience thought they were Germans. The group earned that night just £6, then worth $16.80. Although Paul McCartney had been the first to positively leave the Beatles, John Lennon had been the one who'd consistently issued commercial singles of his own under the name of the Plastic Ono Band, while the band was still officially functioning as a unit. John Lennon formed a scratch group in September 1969 to play a rock and roll revival festival in Toronto. The lineup of himself, Yoko, Eric Clapton on guitar, Alan White on drums, and Klaus Voormann on bass thus became the first incarnation proper of the Plastic Ono Band, though Lennon was to continue to use the name for whatever group of musicians were working for him at any particular time. Plastic Ono Band, live piece in Toronto from 1969, offers recorded highlights of the Toronto Rock and Roll Revival Festival. Lennon, who turned 40 on October 9th, was responsible for writing many of the songs that launched the Beatles in the early 1960s and changed the course of rock music. Lennon rocketed to fame in the early 1960s when he and fellow Britons Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr introduced a new sound that changed the course of rock and roll. Lennon was responsible for writing many of the group's songs. In an interview earlier this year, just published in the January 1981 edition of Playboy, his first major interview in 5 years, Lennon said he had wanted to leave the Beatles as early as 1966, but didn't make the move until 4 years later because he, quoting here, just didn't have the guts. After the Beatles broke up in 1970, Lennon continued writing songs and recording, but in 1975 he dropped out for 5 years, saying he wanted to be with his son, Sean, and his wife. Lennon also had a son, Julian, by his first wife, Cynthia, whom he left in the late 1960s. In 1976, John Lennon won resident status in the United States after a court fight against a deportation order stemming from a British drug conviction. It wasn't until last summer that he returned to music, and his 14-song album Double Fantasy was released just last month. The album, which includes songs by Yoko Ono, is based on Lennon's experiences over those past 5 years, during which he kept house, cooked, and cared for their son. This is Air Force Sergeant Rick Delisle. Our special retrospective on John Lennon continues after the news on AFN Europe. In Berlin. And now, part 2 of our retrospective on John Lennon. The British invasion of the United States began in 1963, and in August 1964, a Beatles film, Hard Day's Night, opened to extraordinary critical and popular acclaim. Albums to follow included Rubber Soul, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the Beatles' White Album, and Abbey Road. Some critics blamed Lennon's 1969 marriage to Yoko Ono for the breakup of the Beatles after she was denied a fifth Beatle status, but John Lennon denied that. Lennon, who released a dozen solo albums after the Beatles' breakup, said he was most affected by early rock and roll, blues music, and Elvis Presley.
It was his last. I'm Dara Wells from The Source, and John Lennon was shot and killed last night in New York City. 25-year-old Mark David Chapman of Honolulu is being arraigned for Lennon's murder. Chapman's been identified as an out-of-work security guard, and New York City police say it was Chapman who emptied a .38 caliber revolver into Lennon as he and Yoko Ono returned to their apartment on Manhattan's Upper West Side. Just moments after the murder last night, fans began to gather around Lennon's apartment building, many of them crying, all of them stunned, like this couple.
To millions of people, this has the impact of a presidential assassination. There's no question about it.
It was the first thing that went through my mind. Like, this is, for me, it's like John Kennedy, because I remember I was like 7 at the time or something, and I remember my parents crying and stuff like that. And this is the first time this kind of impact has occurred on me.
Ironically, John Lennon talked about death in some of the last interviews he did.
That's from the White Album on 97 Rock. We are doing a tribute to John Lennon throughout the day here at 97 Rock. Call us up here. Phone number 644-9890. Give us your feelings. We'll put them on the air. What do we have? 26 minutes past 10 o'clock. And if you haven't heard yet, John Lennon died yesterday. 7 Rock.
Yes, my feelings for John Lennon, I cannot believe it. I still can't. I think it's a shame. I feel like a piece of me has died. I grew up with the Beatles. That was such a big part of my life. The last time I felt this way is when Kennedy was assassinated. That's exactly what happened. I feel Lennon was assassinated. I'm very depressed. I just can't believe it. It's a shame. What a shame.
Thanks for sharing the thoughts. It's unfortunate that the last time the Beatles will ever reunite has to be for a funeral. John Lennon last night was killed at 11 o'clock in New York City, if you haven't heard yet. And I guess they will reunite in, 4 or 5 days, 3 days, whatever it will take. We're going to do a tribute to Lennon throughout the day here at 97 Rock. Do something from John Lennon's Walls and Bridges album. We have just got together a Lennon special, which we will be doing at 11 o'clock today. It is done by The Source's Jim Cameron. It will be a reaction from prominent rock figures, people's reaction to the Beatles, some history. Accent will be on Lennon, of course. Actualities from people who knew him. We'll do, like, historical subjects of Lennon's deportation, the reunion of the Beatles, all the speculation that went on, a profile on John Lennon, a Christmas message for the BBC in London that the Beatles did. This all happens at 11 o'clock. It's 15 minutes long. We will be doing it throughout the day. A John Lennon special. Haven't heard yet. John Lennon was killed last night in New York City. We are doing a tribute through Lennon throughout the day here at 97 Rock. At 11 o'clock today, we will do a special, a John Lennon special with actualities from eyewitnesses to the shooting, reaction from prominent rock figures. We'll look into his career, his deportation, Lennon and Yoko and their life and everything. It's a 15-minute thing. It starts at 11 o'clock right here at 97 Rock. If you'd like to share your thoughts with us, we would love you to call us here. 644-9890 is the number. Give us a call.
I don't know. I feel the comparison people are making to the feelings when JFK was shot. With all respect to the president, for myself personally, it far surpasses that because of the fact that John Lennon had such an impact on my life, and I'm sure on so many people throughout the world, on the way we grew up, on our views, and what we thought about and what shaped us. I feel that the Beatles had a big part in that for me, and it's sad to me to hear of his death. And I'm sure that I certainly hope that justice is carried out on the maniac that did this to him. I just think he should be publicly shot. That's all I really have to say.
Thanks for calling 97 Rock. Haven't heard yet. Some guy walked up to Lennon last night. It was about 11 o'clock. He got down in a shooting position and shot him 5 times. He put 5 holes into Lennon. Lennon bled to death on the way to the hospital last night at about 11:30 or so. We have a special on John Lennon. We'll be looking into people that saw the shooting, talking with prominent rock figures, actualities from people who knew him, the career of Lennon and Yoko, Lennon when he comes to New York City and how he's enjoyed his life in New York City the last couple of years. We're going to do that in a couple of minutes here at 97 Rock. A 15-minute special on Lennon. And throughout the day here at 97 Rock, we are doing a tribute to John Lennon.
97 Rock gives Buffalo 60 seconds.
Which 2 teams are going to be in a Super Bowl?
Philadelphia and Buffalo. Those are the 2 best teams.
I think Buffalo and Philadelphia.
Why Philadelphia?
Because they won 12 games or 11 games.
Buffalo and San Diego.
Why San Diego?
I don't know. They're a good passing team.
Which 2 teams are going to be in a Super Bowl this year?
Oh, I hope it'll be Buffalo, but I rather doubt it. I have to agree with San Diego. Buffalo, of course. I got to say Buffalo, yeah.
Who else?
Philadelphia, I guess.
I'd say Buffalo and the Eagles.
Buffalo and Eagles. That's what a lot of people are saying. Why do you think the Eagles?
Just overall, it's a good team. Buffalo has good defense, but offensive-wise, they're not the best. And the Eagles, I think, just got us beat all the way around.
Which 2 teams are going to be in the Super Bowl?
The Bills and the Eagles.
Why the Eagles?
They're strong on defense, they're strong on offense, and they should go all the way to the Super Bowl.
Buffalo Bills.
I would say Buffalo and
Philadelphia.
Which 2 teams are going to be in the Super Bowl?
Cleveland and Dallas.
I think Buffalo's going to make it.
No. Although I was surprised and really happy when they beat the Rams. And I felt the same way against the Steelers.
If you have a question you'd like us to use, send it to 60 seconds, care of 97 Rock, WGRQ Buffalo.
Hello, 97 Rock.
Yes, I'd just like to say that I'm also deeply hurt by the death of John Lennon. I just want to, express my mourning. I'm only 16, but the Beatles are my favorite group and always will be. I've never been devastated by a death as much as this one.
Thanks for calling 97 Rock.
With this special report from The Source, I'm Jim Cameron. None of us will probably ever forget where we were and what we were doing when we first got word. When we heard the first reports that John Lennon, the man who gave birth to the Beatles, was dead, felled by a lone gunman in front of his New York City home. Correspondent C.D. Jaco's been with this story since it began and tells us of John Lennon's last day.
John Lennon and Yoko Ono left their apartment in New York's famous Dakota apartment building Monday afternoon, headed for the record plant, a local studio. They were preparing to cut a new single. They may not have noticed a young man standing on the street. Neighbors say he had been hanging around the Dakota for several days. Only hours before, he had asked John for an autograph on an album. Lennon signed it. About 10:30 at night, John and Yoko returned from the studio. They stepped out of their limousine and started inside. The young man who'd been hanging around called to them. John turned. The young man was in a military firing position, both hands around the grip of a Charter Arms .38 caliber revolver, his knees bent. He emptied the gun into Lennon. Lennon staggered several feet and collapsed in an office area.
What happened? I saw John and Yoko get out of the limousine. They walked into the gate, and let me take your time. And then I heard four or five shots. They were ear shattering. I heard Yoko, and I heard a woman screaming. It was Yoko. She was screaming, "Help me."
Police cars raced to the Dakota, where officers found Lennon and lifted him into the back seat.
3 cop cars and about 5 people counting me, and I saw the cops wrestling with a guy in a tan jacket and tinted glasses and kind of a brownish blonde haircut, heavy set, and they threw the cuffs on him and put him into a police car. And moments after that, I saw 4 officers carrying John Lennon out, and he was bleeding in the mouth, and he looked very unconscious, and they put him into the back of the police car, and they took him to the hospital.
The squad car was driven at top speed to the emergency room of Roosevelt Hospital, about a mile away. Dr. Stephen Lynn is in charge of that emergency room.
John Lennon was brought to the emergency room of the Roosevelt site, St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital, this evening, shortly before 11 p.m. He was dead on arrival.
Dr. Lynn broke the news to Yoko.
I did tell his wife that he was dead, and she was most distraught at the time and found it quite hard to accept.
Outside the Dakota, hundreds of people, shocked and stunned, gathered in the warm New York night. Local radio stations played nothing but Beatles songs. The faithful lit candles, wept in each other's arms, laid flowers on the building grillwork, and cried for John Lennon and for that part of our youth that had died.
I heard Imagine, I started to cry, and then I called my sister, and she started to cry, and it was horrible.
It's like to a lot of people, something like this, to millions of people, this has the impact of a presidential assassination. There's no question about it.
It was the first thing that went through my mind. Like, this is, for me, it's like John Kennedy, because I remember I was like 7 at the time or something, and I remember my parents crying and stuff like that. And this is the first time this kind of impact has occurred on me. I don't know. I can't imagine the world without him. I really can't.
And amid the sorrow, confusion. Who shot John Lennon? Why? The young man who'd been hanging around for a week just stood there after firing, threw the gun down, and was grabbed by a doorman. He was taken to 20th Precinct headquarters nearby.
We have arrested Mark David Chapman of 55 South Kukui, Kukui Street, Hawaii, for the homicide of John Lennon. He's a male Caucasian, tan complexion, 5 feet 11, 195 pounds, brown hair, blue eyes, and he's 25 years of age.
Mark David Chapman, 3 names straight off the police blotter. 3 names like police give to many accused assassins, like Lee Harvey Oswald, like James Earl Ray. Mark David Chapman, who flew to New York from Honolulu last week, allegedly with a .38 caliber revolver police say he bought in Hawaii. He'd supposedly stayed at YMCAs and local hotels and walked back and forth in front of the Dakota. Mark David Chapman has been charged with the first-degree murder of John Lennon.
I delivered groceries to his apartment. He was a gentleman. He was a genius. He was an artist. He wasn't a politician who got shot. He was an artist. And he was a great man. And God bless him. The Lord's with him.
Was born in Liverpool, October the 9th, 1940. By the time he was a teenager, his father was gone and his mother dead. But in 1958, he struck up a friendship that was to change his life and all of rock music, because that's when he started playing with Paul McCartney, traveling in 1959 to Hamburg, Germany with a new band, John, Paul, drummer Pete Best, and guitarist Stuart Sutcliffe. Best was soon replaced with Ringo Starr, and Sutcliffe died. Then back to Liverpool in a booking in a cellar club called The Cavern, where the band was discovered by Brian Epstein, the man who was to become the Beatles' manager. By 1963, the Beatles were performing for the Queen. A year later, they were honored by being named members of the Order of the British Empire. It was during this time that John first became a father. His son, John Julian Lennon, born to his first wife, Cynthia. But by 1968, that marriage was gone. Yoko Ono announcing to the world that she would bear Lennon's second child fully a month before his divorce was finalized. As Lennon's life was starting over, the Beatles were falling apart. In 1967, Brian Epstein died, and along with him went the only thing keeping the band together. Writer Lawrence Shames remembers those times.
Lennon in the 60s, although on the one hand he was already tremendously wealthy and powerful and famous, was really in many ways terrifically naive and an incurable idealist.
And that idealism carried over into politics.
And stay in bed for peace. Do something like that can't be smashed.
In the early 70s, John Lennon became the target of deportation. The U.S. government arguing that he was ineligible for permanent residency in the country because of a 1968 drug conviction. Lennon fought the government and won.
This is the land of the free, right? And since the last 100 years, all the artists, major and otherwise, have been attracted to this country. And although initially I came as a Beatle, it was Yoko's influence that got me to look at it as a place to be in rather than just scoot in and run back with the loot.
Ultimately, it was only money that kept the Beatles together, or at least kept the four members talking to each other. But in 1977, when they tried to end even that tenuous relationship, Paul McCartney remembers they couldn't even agree on that.
Basically, the three of us, George, Ringo and myself, are ready to sort of get settled and ready to finish up and get it all cooled out. But John has got certain objections at the moment, and Lord knows what they are, but he's been a bit funny at the moment.
Between 1975 and 1980, John Lennon didn't even record, turning his time and energy instead toward his personal wealth, buying homes, buying land, and even buying some prize-winning cows. And writer Lawrence Shames.
When Lennon was singing in the streets and giving his support to radical causes, he opened himself to a lot of criticism, and he showed himself to have that sort of leftist, working-class anger. In his later years, with his tremendous resources and his decision to invest and to try to build security for himself and his family, obviously that's something of a different side of him.
John and Yoko came to call New York City their new home, buying into the very expensive and very exclusive Dakota apartments.
One of the things that characterized him and Yoko both was a real love-hate for the city and a love-hate for the whole idea of being that well-known and being recognized. And I think that although Lennon genuinely did want his privacy, I think that to really go somewhere where he would be obscure and unknown, maybe he just couldn't quite make that break.
Lennon really liked New York. He traveled the streets in public, often showing up at local clubs, but always in the shadows, lurking more than strutting the way some stars did. And now this star shines no more. The dream is over, and with it, a part of us is also gone. One day before John Lennon died, he and Yoko recorded their annual Christmas message for the BBC.
Happy Christmas.
And so this is Christmas. And what have you done? Another year over? Etc., etc. Nice to be here. Hi. We're pretty damn steady, I'd say that. We're in good condition. Thank you very much. It's great to talk to you. And it's not kindness. We want to sell the record and we want to talk to the English too. It's a pleasure. Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas.
And a brobrach nechtanu.
Report on the life and death of John Lennon. I'm Jim Cameron from The Source.
Lennon yesterday, after finishing a real hard day of recording, got out of his limo and started walking to the entrance of his door, and some guy that's been trailing him for about a week, they say, walked up to him, shouted out his name, and then knelt down and pointed a gun, a .38 revolver, at him and shot him 5 times. John Lennon died on the way to the hospital. It was about 11:30 last night. We were going to do a special, John Lennon. We just did one about, it was about a half an hour ago. We'll be doing it throughout the day here at 97 Rock.
A lot, and then I started getting into the individual people, and I just wish that John Lennon would have made more music, but I love all his music that he made. He's terrific, and I really feel bad that what happened to him. it made me cry inside.
Tribute to John Lennon, shot down last night, 11 o'clock, at the age of 40. We've got an all-day tribute we're doing to John Lennon and a special 15-minute source report. That'll be a special program, and that'll be coming up in about 10 minutes right here on 97 Rock. What? I'm getting flagged at here. It is, it's like we've been talking about John Lennon and the Beatles and that all day. It's gotten to the point now where it's almost kind of, morbid in that. And we don't want to be morbid. It's a sad thing that John Lennon has died. But, we'll be featuring more of his music and that throughout the day in hopes that you'll realize what a good man he was and how great his music was, too.
The suspect in the shooting death of John Lennon is being sent to a hospital for psychiatric evaluation. I'm Mary Lyon from The Source, and Mark David Chapman, the 25-year-old suspect in the shooting of John Lennon, will not be arraigned right away. Authorities say he's being sent to New York's Bellevue Hospital to be examined by psychiatrists. Police now say he has a long criminal record, which includes charges of armed robbery. They say he bought his .38 caliber pistol in Honolulu just 6 weeks ago. He'd been living in Hawaii for the past 4 years, but he was born in Texas and grew up in Georgia. He was part of the class of 73 at Columbia High School near Atlanta. Lucy Baggett was one of his classmates.
Met him in 8th grade. He was real, very straight. He was very into schoolwork and everything. And, just real straight. And then he just changed over the years. Now, I know he played in a band, a local band. Senior year, he was more into religion and everything.
Police say Mark David Chapman apparently shot John Lennon 4 times. Source correspondent Bob Madigan is outside the Dakota apartment building in New York City where John was killed last night.
Right now it's starting to rain. The temperature is dropping, but the crowd continues to swell. It's now estimated to be a couple of thousand strong. The crowd is quiet. Sometimes they break into quiet song, sometimes playing Beatles and Lennon music. The New York City schools just about letting out right now. Police expect even more to flock to the Lennon home to pay their last respects. Many tell me that they're here because they felt they had to come by. The one New Jersey college student, also here for 15 hours already, tells me she intends to stay here through the night or until she drops, whichever comes first. It's a spiritual vigil outside the flower-covered iron gates to the Lennon's home, the Dakota, right here in New York City. And that's news. I'm Bob Madigan from The Source.
She said she showed him a picture of his father on the cover of the paper to explain what had happened. Yoko told Sean that the man who killed Lennon was probably confused and that the rest would be up to the court. Sean wanted to know whether that would be the tennis court or the basketball court. Later, Yoko said Sean cried and said, "Now Daddy is part of God." You probably know there will be no funeral for John Lennon, and on Wednesday, John's body was cremated at a funeral home outside of New York City in Hartsdale. According to British newspapers, Yoko wanted the cremation to be kept secret to avoid hysteria. The man accused of killing John Lennon, Mark David Chapman, is still undergoing psychiatric testing at Bellevue in New York City. For the first time, Chapman's wife, Gloria, spoke with reporters in Honolulu. Her attorney guided the questioning, explaining that what had happened was a shock for her as well. She described herself as a Beatle fan, extended her condolences, but denied feeling any bitterness.
No, I don't feel bitter. I don't think that's the right word. I'm not bitter about it. I think that maybe somehow some good is going to come out of this. That's all. I don't know what, but I'm just hoping and praying that some good will come out of it. I'm just a very optimistic type person.
At the same time, Paul McCartney has hired 2 bodyguards to patrol his family estate in Sussex, England. According to the Daily Mail, McCartney's house will be guarded round the clock, whether he and his family are there or not. And that's news. I'm Bill Vitka from The Source.
She sounds as crazy as her old man, doesn't she? Well, going to take care of some news. I just said that already. Yoko Ono announced that for 10 minutes on Sunday, beginning at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, there's going to be a silent prayer vigil wherever you are. To quote Yoko, no funeral is planned. Lennon's remains were cremated in New York earlier yesterday. Groups lobbying for handgun control yesterday said that the recent fatal shooting of Lennon in New York and a prominent doctor in Washington have caused a national outcry against handguns. A citizens lobby group called Handgun Control Incorporated says its phones have not stopped ringing for the past 2 days because of the 2 deaths. And an officer of the National Coalition to Ban Handguns says he's never seen anything like the reaction he is seeing now. With good reason.
And John's body was moved on Wednesday, taken at first to a funeral home in New York City, and then to another funeral home in Hartsdale, New York, just outside the city, where the body was cremated. There was never any plan to have a funeral. Instead, Yoko would like a 10-minute silent vigil to take place at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on Sunday. A vigil still continues outside the Dakota, the apartment building where the Lennons lived. But again, Yoko says instead of sending flowers, send donations to the Spirit Foundation, which John and Yoko both quietly set up about a year ago. The Spirit Foundation has contributed money to charities that help the aged, the Police Athletic League, and organizations that deal with orphans and runaways like Covenant House in New York City. The man the police say killed John Lennon, Mark David Chapman, is still under a suicide watch. According to the New York Daily News, Chapman has said, "I've got a good side and a bad side. The bad side is very small, but sometimes it takes over the good side, and I do bad things." Paul Gorish is somebody that you probably don't know, but you might have seen a photo that he took of John Lennon signing a copy of a record for David Chapman just a few hours before Lennon was shot. And Gorish not only took the picture, but he spoke with David Chapman.
When I was trying to leave, Chapman said, "You shouldn't leave." And I said, he said, "Don't you want your album signed?" Because I brought a copy of the album. And I said, "No." I said, "I'll get it signed tomorrow," because I was going to go back and give Lennon the pictures that he wanted to see. He asked me to bring him some other pictures. So I said, "I'll get it tomorrow." And he said, "You don't know, you might not see him again." And, it didn't mean anything to me at the time. And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I see him all the time." He says, "Yeah, but something could happen to him. He could go away to Spain or something, and you might not ever see him again."
There still seem to be some hard times ahead. A teenage girl in Florida and a 30-year-old man in Utah, both apparently distraught about John Lennon's death, apparently committed suicide. The teenage girl was found dead on Tuesday, reportedly an overdose of pills. In Salt Lake City, in a completely unrelated case, a man apparently depressed after finding out that Lennon was killed put a gun to his own head. And that's news. I'm Bill Vitka from The Source.
And I'm Cindy Chan at 97 Rock. In other news this morning, a 24-year-old...